Bandwidth for this podcast is brought to you by Ideate Software. Be sure to check out all of their great Revit applications designed to increase your productivity. It is crazy that you're here listening to BIM Thoughts. You know, we have a guest today. We're not by ourselves. Dalton Goodwin. Dalton, define yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the first thing is I'm a dad. I raised my son by myself, so that's a big part of my life. And then outside of that, you know, I'm pretty passionate about just technology, AEC stuff. And it's kind of funny because I fell into it by accident. Just happened to be reading some stuff, and I saw some 2D floor plans of some CAD stuff that somebody did, and I thought that would be interesting. And from there, it just kind of happened. I ended up loving it quite a bit, and yeah, and so it's kind of me.
It's kind of you.
Yeah.
So what's your YouTube all about?
Yeah, so it's focused on it's AEC related stuff, but it does span a lot of different technologies. But there is a bit of a focus on Python and Dynamo. I get into kind of data related stuff. So sometimes I'll look at Knime, which is an open source data analytics tool. That's really cool. It's kind of like Dynamo has that kind of interface. But then you know, next week and on, I'm looking at Bimbeats, and then so it's a variety of different things, but I try to focus with data, coding, and like Revit and Dynamo.
That's cool. What's your YouTube channel called?
The BIM Coordinator.
The BIM Coordinator. So make sure you go to the BIM Coordinator and subscribe. So Knime, what is that? Tell me more about that.
Knime was a tool that I was briefly kind of investigating. It's pretty cool. It's an open source data analytic tool. I think that's what they call kind of describe themselves as. But I get in there once in a while. I have a few YouTube videos. I plan on getting in there a little bit more often and maybe even trying to build some custom things in it. But it's an open source thing. What I love about that, what's a little bit different than like other getting into machine learning or data science, is the fact that it doesn't require a lot of code. There's things you can definitely do if you know how to code, but it's very low barrier to entry. So if you're trying to explain a certain topic that's related to data science or whatever it is, if you're manipulating data, it's really easy to understand in there. You can see the different nodes and how they work with each other, just like you would use, or like how you could use Dynamo. It's just you plug in a bunch of nodes and then you see kind of the output. So
cool. So Carl, have you gotten into Python yet?
It's always been on my list, but I just haven't gotten there, and I don't know why.
I don't know why either. I started doing the Python because I used to do VBA and VBS, and that's so yesterday. So here's what I found out cool about Python. You can have the Python executable on the network. I don't know if I've told this on a podcast before. If I have, well, listen again. So you can have the Python executable on the network drive and launch the Python script from the workstation pointing to the Python on the network without installing Python on the workstation. Did you know you could do that?
Do you know what happens every time I try to use Python?
No.
By myself. Because usually I try actually to have Python company, like a son or some of my coworkers that are really wonderful to me.
Right.
Whenever I Python solo,
yes,
I usually end up crying.
Really?
Yes, it's so frustrating.
You shouldn't cry. There's no crying in Python.
I usually cry when I get like super frustrated. Like when I feel hopeless.
When you feel hopeless. Well, I don't use Python much for the Revit stuff. I use Python more for data manipulation or for doing things to files or settings on computers. That's what I mainly use Python for.
like writing small application tools.
Like cleaning up the BIM 360 or whatever it's called today, cache off of hard drives. So I have a Python script that will go through each user profile folder in the C drive and delete any of those cache files that are over 30 days old and the related files that go with it.
Does it run when they start their computer?
No, I have it run on a schedule. So our deployment server runs that on a schedule to clean up those machines. Otherwise, the login experience is bad because the computer becomes slow, and so the user is unhappy. We can't have that. But yeah, that's what I use Python for these days, cleaning up the BIM 360 cache files. I actually archive them, then delete them, just in case they're needed. Or we archive the RVT file, because hard drives are cheap. So Dalton, how did you learn the Python?
Yeah, so Python, it was, I think I originally in school got into it, but then, I mean, I was learning so much at that time, and then I switched over to C#, and then I was trying to learn that and then eventually quit doing it, and then switched back to Python, I don't know, 3 years ago, and just really invested in it. But I think what mostly did it for me was just different projects, trying to do little things with it. And I think some of the first things I tried were I started getting into data science. I started doing some web scraping things. There was one of the first apps, or it wasn't an app, just a little script, but it would go out into the Inkscape website and then download the user activity so that we could see who's going out there and using that. Or that might have been not Inkscape. It might have been Matterport. So it started with those little things, and then I try to every night. If I don't get into Python at all during the day, I try to at night at least go into Codewars, and I think there's other tools like that, or other websites like that. I think Leak Code and others. But I try to go out to Codewars every night and just do a challenge or something. And then I've got a number of folks that I talk to about Python related stuff. But I would say the biggest thing that I learned, I mean, the biggest way for me to learn was just doing all the little projects, and then they gradually got bigger, and there was different ones, and then I started to identify all the different ways that I could, potentially use Python.
Yeah, what I've found I found recently, I wish I would have known this tidbit in the past, is I learned better by having a project to do than to just sit down and say, I want to learn Python, or I want to learn C#, or I want to learn how to do macrame. If I don't have a project to do and a reason to do it, I don't learn it well. So for example, I had a project that I needed to do for work, which was a self-service printer portals. So a user could go onto the printer portal and find the printer they want, hit the connect button, and then it installs the printer for them. And so I needed to learn how to do that. So I learned a little bit about PHP and how to do that, and connecting to databases and things like that. And by having a project, a reason to learn it, is how I figured out I learned best.
Yeah, I think like my YouTube channel keeps me accountable as well. I think sometimes I don't know about, like, sometimes there's no project that I have, at least that's directly related to work, and so I'll investigate a little bit and try to figure out what it is that I can do or try to learn, and then I try to create projects. I know there's a number of LinkedIn learning courses that are specifically talk about projects to do, and that's why I like Codewars, because if the lower levels you go, they have like actual projects you can do. And so but by doing the YouTube channel, it's like, oh, I'm going to do this, and then that's really kept me accountable for actually trying to learn how to code.
Well, absolutely, because now you've got a reason to do it. The reason is you want to do it on your YouTube channel, which is a valid reason, right?
Definitely. And I think like Forge, and I'm not a Forge dev, but the BIM 360 and data management API was really huge. And when all the COVID stuff hit, we really wanted to, our DLR group, they really wanted to get everybody out there. And so I didn't know anything about Forge. I didn't know anything about web requests or RESTful APIs or any of that stuff. And I think, that was a real project and real opportunity to dive into it and really learn it. And I mean, I learned so much in that. And, you have the pressure of other people just trying to do it. And I even rolled those into possible, YouTube videos. I think I did a few on Forge. And like Postman and other tools that play with Forge. And so doing that project at work, I learned so quickly.
So how is Forge these days? Were you able to get everything accomplished in Forge you wanted to get accomplished?
Yeah, so I don't use all the other APIs. I touch the BIM 360 and the data management API. DLR Group isn't totally invested in BIM 360. All projects are started in it. So with the BIM 360 API, you can, and it's all documented really well. And so you can make what I would do is I would test things in Postman and then try it and then rewrite it in Python and create a little script or something. And I would say, everything that I needed to do with it worked. Now, they do have an initiative. They're trying to create an app that automates a variety of different things that, adds users and things like that. But how I was using it, it worked for me. I was able to do everything. I am looking forward to when they release some of their updates. I think it's still in beta, but they have some analytics on how each team member is using BIM 360 at a project level. And so you can see if people are getting out there and using it. And I don't know if they've released that part of the API yet, but that's, I think, going to be pretty interesting to get that kind of data to understand if people are actually really using the tool to the full extent or what training needs to happen or whatever. So I would say that's the only thing that's missing. But.
Yeah, one of the challenges I have with any of those APIs like Forge or the Revit API, and when I started to learn it, to try to figure it out, was what I wanted to do wasn't available in the API. And so that's a big buzzkill. And then it takes a long time to try to get back into it, to trust it, that the stuff you need to do is in the API. So I guess my words of wisdom for that is, before you start going down the API track, get with somebody who knows it and say, hey, this is what I want to do. Does the API do that? And they quickly, yes or no, answer that. They don't have to tell you how to do it, but if they do, that's great. But at least that gives you the confidence knowing that, okay, I can start this project and I'm going to be able to finish this project and do what I need to do.
That seems like a common occurrence for you, Bill. It's the API's fault it's not in the API. It's the node's fault because that node's not there.
Right. It's always something else's fault. It's never my fault, Carl. You know that.
But you are absolutely right. It's the same with working with the Revit API. Some things are there, some things aren't. Part of the fun, and I'm definitely doing air quotes when I say fun, is that sometimes what you need isn't in the API, but there's 3 adjacent things in the API that if you know a little bit of Python or Java or PHP or whatever it might be, you can use the data and then use the code to manipulate the data. So I've found that APIs are good for getting you access to the data. Rarely is the data how you need it. That's where the coding part, the in-between part, comes into play. And Dalton mentioned Postman. I've played a little bit with that with the BIM track API, and that is a very user-friendly tool for those that are new to the API to get out there, to be able to do a little bit of work. If you have to do a little bit of the coding with it, they have lots of tutorials and sort of help documents to do that. And it's a great way to test your API before you go out and actually build something, customer facing, if you will. So I highly recommend the Postman route if you're gonna get into the API world.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I really like that tool because what I would do is I would read the documentation on the documentation on a particular API or whatever the request was, and then go in and build that in Postman, just like you were mentioning, Carl. And then in there's you can convert it directly into Python. I think there's like 20 or 30 different languages that you can choose from. You can convert that entire request to just a native Python code or whatever code you want, and then from there you can tweak it and turn it into an actual script or application, which is really handy.
Yeah, I'm going to need to get into that. I have lots of little projects I need to do with API calls these days.
And that's what makes it really handy. Is it's a great prototyping tool. It's a great prototyping tool. Kind of like Dynamo. It's a great place to flush your ideas, make sure it works, and then eventually move it into an add-in, either through using C# and building something, or something you put into Revit using a little bit of Python. That makes it a little more stable than using it inside of Dynamo itself. But these tools that take us from just general BIM and VDC folks that know a little bit to getting into that coding mentality where you can do a little bit of Google, go into a tool like Dynamo or Postman where you can put together your ideas because you know how it's supposed to work, but you're not necessarily a computer science geek, and get it to go from there. And then, maybe move on to that next level like Dalton, where you're taking it and actually building the code to make the app, or someone in your firm like Dana has that can actually do that for you. But to be able to get people to have more ability to start that process, not just have an idea, but to be able to take the idea and grow it a little bit, and then either pass it off to someone that can take it across the finish line, or as Bill said in our last couple episodes, have those consultants that are doing that type of work, bring them in to finish it.
Right. Or even start it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I love that because it's sometimes the default is just to learn how to program in C# or something that has a much higher barrier to get into, and it's like there's a lot of other tools that can get you, it can get you pretty close to being there, and then that are a lot easier to use, and then what you can do is then hand it off if you're in that particular situation. But I'm not a big fan of the default of everybody should learn these more complicated tools. That's why I'm a fan of like Knime. It allows non-data science people to get into the tool without being an expert in every single Python, data science library. You can easily just plug and play, and you still are pretty close to having a working thing. And what's nice about that tool is you can roll it into, you can deploy it from there, but you can easily pass that to somebody to develop it into something.
So what data science stuff do you do inside of Revit? What's one of your great little projects you'd like to share?
Well, I say I don't do much in Revit, but what's nice at DLR. So currently I'm making a transition from DLR to Henderson Engineers. So I'm in between jobs. I'm taking a bit of a vacation, but at DLR Group, what I did was we were very data centric, so we had a lot of different data, and they actually hired a data scientist. So that was really great because I got to work with that person and learn quite a bit. So one of the first R&D efforts that I was on was just simply trying to learn the relationships between all the different room types, and eventually roll that into an actual app that could be leveraged throughout the firm to recommend, or if somebody was looking for a particular type of room or type of space, then they could search for it. If they were a newer employee, then they could get recommendations from all the different models that we had in the firm, and it could show them that. And there was a number of other projects I know the data scientist person was working on, and then but I learned quite a bit, and it was more just R&D efforts. It was just to see what was possible. So that's when I played around with Knime quite a bit. I got heavy into Python and Jupyter notebooks, but it was just to see the relationship between rooms. And one of the things I went into it kind of like I thought, it's like, after looking at all the data and analyzing it, I was like, this data isn't that great. There's a lot of missing data, and it seems to be the case everywhere. And you've got architects that all do kind of different things. They name things differently, and so it was interesting to learn from the data scientists there that sometimes, depending on what you're trying to do, like not all the data is necessary, and sometimes you can pull interesting insights into with just limited amounts of data. I mean, very small portions. So it's a lot of like, I don't know, just analyzing it, trying to figure out what, it's this variable mean anything? Does this one mean anything? Comparing the two. A lot of feature engineering. I did quite a bit of that. So looking at two different features and two different variables because we use Clarity. So that was pulling out all the data that we were leveraging. And so looking at, I don't know, area to how many doors, and then making a feature out of that to say. And so there was a number of those things, and they're still developing a lot of that stuff. But yeah, that's kind of it, man.
What was your big aha moment with rooms?
I don't know. So my focus was like offices, just trying to understand the relationship between all of them. But
so what were you looking at in the rooms to try to determine whatever were you looking at?
Everything. I mean, the doors, the walls, the wall types, the ceilings, and then furniture and stuff like that. The difficult part was a lot of that stuff was either in other models or it was separate interiors model. So there was a lot of trying to figure out how to group it together.
So you were looking for objects that touch the room.
Well, yeah, they were a part of the room, and the idea was that if we could group these subtypes of offices, then the idea is that somebody could search that, and then what this can do is identify where these particular offices are in all these different models. Bring that forward through I don't know, some UI, but bring it forward to show it. Here's different design options for that particular type. It was more, I would say, it was an R&D effort to see what we could get from it. I don't know if it would roll into an actual application, but it was interesting to see what it takes to actually build something. And it made me appreciate all the other things that go into it. It's not always like you throw all the data into a flashy ML model and then it does all the work for you. There's a lot of like pre-steps, identify like what the business plan is and what you're trying to do and really the question that you're after, and then tweaking and playing with the data to then eventually bring into an ML model. So
yeah, I can see an application for that where you would have something that would go out and find all the rooms in the building. It would then categorize each room by type, office. If it's a exam room in a hospital, is it a classroom in an elementary school, or K through 12, as the cool kids call it, and then grab the elements inside of that room to determine like how many desks are in the classroom or how many conference room chairs are in that office, and then have a library of thumbnails of those rooms that you could then search and say, okay, I'm looking for ideas for an executive office that has a conference table with 8 chairs in it that's about this square footage, and then have it pop up all the different designs that the company has already done.
Yeah, and that was the goal. And I think also it was to, especially when you've got designers across, just everywhere. We have offices all over North America, and then we have offices in Dubai and Shanghai. And and sometimes, there's folks only see what's in a particular office or what they're doing on a daily. And so this would allow them to see all the different variations across, everywhere to then learn from, or to maybe inspire different ideas. So yeah, it was interesting, and it's, the challenge is just the data, and in my opinion, it's just really, really messy.
Yes, the data is really, really messy. Dana, I am sure you have a question or two.
The cool thing is that at Smith Group, we are doing a very similar initiative in trying to quantify all of those things. Just like Dalton was saying, it's nomenclature matters a lot. Category of elements matters a lot, right? Especially in today's world of Enscape and visualization, AR, VR. We're seeing a lot of designers grabbing manufacturer content, for better or worse, and that manufacturer content may not be furniture, right? So how do we quantify that conference room table or that workstation or that chair that isn't in the category that we want it to be, isn't named in the way that we want it to? That collaboration space versus conference room versus, breakout room, all of these different types of variables that you don't even know to look for. Right. So, how do we standardize and create a system that works across the board? And I think that's where data science is super, super interesting, right? Like Dalton was saying, how do we comb and find variables that matter, that maybe we don't have to ask 100 questions, we can ask 10 questions, but still get the same amount of value from those 10 questions as we would from the 100.
Yeah, I mean, it's all the different. There's just so many different variables. I think like before I cleaned up the rooms, it was interesting because it was and this went for like every different data table. Was that there was like here you only had like 20 columns that were useful, and even that's still a lot of variables. And then, but before cleaning it, I think there was about 1,500 just different columns because people name their everything differently, and so it's just a lot of different data. And then after you clean it up, it's still a lot of stuff to go through, and that's why I think I'm a BIM person. I spend a lot of time in software, but I think more companies see that like having a real data scientist on the team is incredibly useful because they have better, they can see the value behind that. Like my default to seeing all that data was like this data is useless. Like it's missing so many different things. There's no value to this that I can see. I'm testing it and it's not coming out right. And and he was able to teach me to try to find those weird nuanced things, or the nuanced thing that is a strong indicator for this type of room or whatever the case is. That you don't need to have a whole bunch of data to really leverage it.
Well, and like Bill was alluding, not only can we utilize that data, in the future to see what kind of projects we've had, we can also utilize that in the future when clients come to us and say, what's the standard, right? What are we seeing in a higher ed facility that's around this amount of square feet, right? What kinds of breakout space are we seeing, right? Those types of things.
For sure, yeah. We have an app that they were working on that was, and this was for a certain sector, but they were able to analyze all their different. So everybody has their different opinion on like what a standard, this standard space should be and what it should have in it, and we've got it's kind of a what is it? It's in beta or whatnot, but it's able to scan, a variety of different spaces, identify what's in them, and then essentially create these buckets of predefined families that then gets brought into those spaces, and then and a designer can move them around, which is really interesting and pretty powerful. But it looks at all that historical data of all the different spaces, all the models that we have.
That's really cool.
That is super cool. In a way, I guess it's a way of performing an even more educated form of generative design.
It's all these individual opinions and stuff. And so by looking at the data and pulling something together, it still allows for like you to edit what's really in those buckets for those particular spaces. But so it still allows the designers to do that. But then I think it does a lot of that guesswork, or, it's like, oh, this is the case. This is what the data says. these are what these rooms require, and then from there you can kind of tweak those different buckets. But yeah, it streamlines just what exactly is going into those rooms, and you can quickly just update them or add the elements into them. And I wasn't working on that particular project, but I think they were getting to a point where it's like automatically placing it in those rooms as well.
Yeah, can you imagine tying all that into a generative design model and let it just go wild?
Oh wow.
That would be something, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, especially it's not creating new scenarios necessarily, but pulling from a
Right.
catalog of
Yeah.
existing designs that the firm has already gone through and verified and
Yeah.
gone through the process of constructing. So
Mm-hmm.
that level of check is
It'd be
already
really
there.
cool too, also have in that data set how the client likes that room. Which conference rooms do they use the most? Like a thumbs up, or I guess you can't have thumbs down anymore because YouTube has taken that away. But yeah, it'd be really cool to have that kind of data in there as well, and have data about the energy efficiency of the room. What does it take to cool the room? What does it take to how many outlets should be in the room? All that kind of stuff is.
Well, I guess that would all be a metric that you could rank in level of priority.
And you don't have to add all this stuff all at once. You have to. I think getting back to what I said earlier in the podcast was, you got to know what you want to do. You need a project in order to get started in this kind of stuff. If you don't have a project or a real reason that you want to do it, you're never going to get it done because you're not going to have the interest in it. And that interest could be a YouTube channel. That interest could be something for my day-to-day job. Could be the interest that maybe I want to move up in my current job, move up in the firm, or move to a different firm to be that super cool dude. Who knows? Because what's interesting about the world of AEC is you're not pigeonholed into one spot at your firm. You can take different paths in the firm. You can take a path of being a designer, then move up to an architect, to move to, AIA, FAIA, all that stuff. You could take the path of a design technologist like Dana and I did, and probably a lot of people who listen to this podcast did. And you can take that path and get into the nitty-gritty of the technology and the toys and the stuff like that. But now we're opening up to a spot where we can take a path of a data scientist. And that was available before, but now it's becoming trendy.
Yep.
It's what people are looking for. So that's what's neat about our industry, is we have many, many paths that we can take to be successful and happy. You just need to figure out what path you want to do and invest in yourself and time, maybe a little bit of stuff, and get going and get there. And you really don't need that much stuff anymore. I mean, a gaming PC is probably more powerful than the PC you got at work.
It's what it's kept me pretty motivated. It's the industry. There's always, I think AEC is in a pretty cool spot. There's so many cool things, so many opportunities, and I see it happening in other places at Google and all these big places, but AEC just has so much opportunity to leverage this stuff. I've been in the industry for, I don't know, five years, and it's just been, I don't know, every day is like a new thing, something else that I'm learning. Last year I got into Bimbeats, and we did that at DLR Group, and which then got me into Elastic Stack and all the technology there, and I learned about creating dashboards and effectively creating dashboards and analyzing all that data. And it was, that's just, I think BIM and tech and all of it, there's just so many opportunities and so many different areas to do and learn.
Absolutely. Carl, I'm going to give you the final thought.
Well, I think the final thought that I would take away from this, from the line of questioning or comments or thoughts that we've had here in the last little bit, driving around data scientists or data scientists, depending on how you want to pronounce it, and just to toss in my little bit of perspective is, I've taken a few Power BI classes lately, not to muddy the water with Power BI, but a lot of the examples that you take on, say, like LinkedIn Learning, they always tend to use data that comes from the financial world. So you're using world
Right.
stock prices and things like that. And the data behind that is not my cup of tea. You know, if we're talking about data like we have that comes from Revit, that makes a lot more sense. So being able to make sense of data that doesn't make sense to you seemed to be really hard. So I can really appreciate what Dalton was saying when he had, you know, a data scientist, somebody who's trained in looking at the data for what the data is, not because of what it is, and how that really could help you understand what it is. So I think that's very powerful, having that perspective. The other thing, when everyone was talking about here, by everyone I mean Bill and Dana and Dalton, about the idea of setting up the interface and then adding the data later. You know, Bill, you said you don't have to have every single stream of data that you're going to want in that dashboard or that application to start with, because once you've got the infrastructure, adding streams of data is relatively easy compared to all the rest.
Mhm.
So I think that's my long-winded final thought, that data is definitely here to stay, and that understanding the data, or understanding that you don't know everything about the data, is going to be your key to being successful.
Right. The last tidbit I'd like to add is, it doesn't matter how much you know, it's how well you can Google it.
That is absolutely true.
Well, Dana, Carl, Dalton, thank you so much for joining us today on BIM Thoughts.
Sure, yeah. Thanks a lot for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
It has been a pleasure, and it's been fun, and I learned so much with these podcasts. That's why I continue to do them. But thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we hope you have a great day wherever you are, and hopefully tomorrow's a Bones Day.